Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Quitcast. My name is Becca Syme. We're going to be doing something today that is an outcropping of my having coached so many thousands of authors and having seen the trajectories of people who are exceptionally talented at certain things and being able to parse through and kind of break down the skills that they're using to do what they're doing. So some of the language that we're going to be using in this episode, because I'm trying to intentionally be as granular as I can be when I'm capable of being granular. I may use some personality language. If you don't understand, please feel free to ask me questions in the comments, and I will try to clarify that. But my goal in doing this episode is to talk through some of the skill chains that exist in the concept of market awareness. And if you remember, we had Nat Connors on just a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about why, when I questioned the premise of should you write to market, that there was some nuance to that question, because if we aren't selling, we're going to have to pay attention to the market on some level. So if we are looking for guidance about how to increase our skills in being able to utilize the market, not as a writing aid, but as an actual marketing aid. So using market awareness, as Nat calls it, he talks a lot about the neighborhood, the concept of living inside of the market and being able to see what's going on and then making adjustments based on that. We did a couple of different calls. If you want to learn more about this, they're all free. I'll put all the links in the show notes. And then additionally, we have the 7 skills of writing to market video, which I will link if you're interested in that, because I split out when we talk about writing to market, quote unquote, I split out the idea of the target, which is me writing and marketing in order to hit the market. That's the target versus the marketing and packaging and producing only. I don't think that most of us want to ignore the market completely, but we just don't know how to interact with it. So my goal in talking through this today is, we talked about the writing part already. We're going to talk today primarily about the packaging, producing, and I'm not talking about tactics, I'm talking about skills. There are tons of places you can go to get tactical suggestions about what to do, and Kindletrends is one of those places. But there are lots of them out there. My goal is to talk about the actual skill chains and what might be standing in your way if you don't already know how to do it. But again, we've talked about the difference between I can't and I can't yet, and that difference is really important. I can't yet do this is the mindset that I'm taking in this particular project today. And I want to warn everyone, I'm going to be as practical as I can be. And also, I can't do a deep dive on 7 different skills in one video. And I said this in the Right to Market QTP video. I'm going to do some deep dives. There will be more information coming. There's probably going to be something in the show notes by the time this releases about whatever the thing is that we're going to be doing. But I don't think you need any of that stuff if what you're primarily looking for is, why can't I do this? You can go find your own resources if you want to. You don't have to use ours. But I do think that most people are not capable of seeing the gaps in their own skill chains. That takes perspective and objectivity. And so my goal is to try to fill some of those gaps for you. If you have an easy time doing all 7 of these skills, then you will be able to multiply that, right? The exponential sort of better, faster capacity. And that'll be amazing and excellent. But if you don't, there are things you can do to get slightly better, to keep being in the learning curve, going on the progress wave. And what I'll suggest ahead of time is that you pick the one of these that you want to work on that you are already the best at. So don't pick the one that's the hardest for you. Don't pick the one where you don't even know where to start, no matter what I've said. Pick the one that is the likeliest for you to have capacity already that you can build on, so that you can feel the security of forward motion. So I am going to be as specific as I can, but we also have to get kind of conceptual. Nat and I talked about all of these at various points in our interview, but that was sort of the starting ground for me. That was the first layer. This is the second layer. The third layer for most of us is going to be learning. And some of our learning will have to be practical, and some of our learning will be conceptual or theoretical. But learning is the third step for most of us, so the third layer. And I'll provide some options whenever I can. So let's jump in. When we talk about being in a neighborhood, specifically existing inside of the market as a writer and existing in whatever corner of the market I am in, my ability to understand the neighborhood around me, my ability to take action on the data that I'm seeing relies on some very specific skills. And I'm going to outline those skills one at a time in this video. And I'm going to go as progressively as I'm able. There is one I'm saving for last, which is the most foundationally important skill, but I think it's also the hardest to practice. And so I'm going to get you to the other skills first in case you find places you want to take action on. So let's start with skill number one. Skill number one is contextualizing the neighborhood you're living in. In our interview previously, we talked about how when people look at the whole Kindle store, they often have a difficulty figuring out what part I'm in, quote unquote. So, how do I narrow the data set of only the books that I'm looking at? How do I understand what books are in my corner? Because unlike a neighborhood in your physical location, where the houses are all sort of grouped together or they're all physically located somewhere, it can be a lot harder to understand what your actual neighborhood is, especially the smaller you're trying to go. And that will take time to understand, but there are also some tools that I think are really important. I like Nat's infographics for this, and there may be more tools available at some point, but I like starting with the infographics. You could also start with genre as a big, huge, expansive neighborhood, but most of the time that's too much data for most of us. Understanding where the boundaries of our context are is often the biggest barrier that I see for people who can't get to any of the other market awareness skills because they don't even understand where they fit. There's a couple of complexities here. One is for those of us that write in crossover genres or write in multiple genres. And to that, I would say I would treat each of the books or each of your series as an individual thing in trying to understand the market itself. And I would spend a lot less time trying to understand where each one of those fits if you haven't picked a dominant place that you want to hang out yet. Because I sort of see this understanding the context in terms of if I'm renting a VRBO for 3 months somewhere, I'm not going to get to know all my neighbors. I'm not going to spend a lot of time figuring out how to relate to people, what everybody's patterns are, what my job is in that neighborhood. I'm not going to spend a lot of time there. But if I know I'm buying a house, renting is slightly different, right? Like I may have a different purpose even when I'm renting. I'm just figuring it out. I may look just at big picture things there. But the longer I intend to be here, the more certain I am that this is going to be the neighborhood I'm living in, the more time I want to take to understand the corner that I'm in. So, for those of us who are extremely concrete in the way that we understand data, contextualizing might actually look like going into the Kindle store and looking. It might look like using one of the infographics. And then the farther on the spectrum that you get towards intuitive in your decision making, which again, there's all kinds of shades of variance along that. You can be both. And the more you're in the middle, we talk about this a lot in when we do continuum work. There's always a flex that you have in both directions. So wherever you would locate yourself, you're probably going to be able to flex a little bit in each direction. The more extreme you are, the less likely you are to be able to flex all the way over to the other side. But when you're more in the middle and you can flex into more concrete thinking and then flex into sort of more intuitive thinking, you have the capacity to do both of those. But I do think it's important to say if you are not both of them and you are primarily one or the other, your process is going to look a little bit different. I'm less worried about the concrete people because I think they have a better sense for how to do this naturally. But the more intuitive we are in this process, the harder it is to understand how to contextualize those boundaries. And I'm going to tell you, the more you just live in your house, the better your contextualizing is going to be. If you're highly intuitive in your decision making and you're not feeling a need to understand more about the market, then you shouldn't. You shouldn't go looking for it. That's not your thing. So the more heavily on the intuitive side you are, the more important it is to free yourself up from feeling like you have to be conscious all the time, that I could tell you which neighborhood I'm living in. You will be able to make a decision based on where you're at, that you're taking in the information. So I do think it's important to say, if you're very extreme on that continuum, to go ahead and let yourself be the highly, highly intuitive decision maker you are. Most of us are going to be somewhere in the middle. And when you're in the middle on your capacity to contextualize what your neighborhood looks like, that means what you usually need is more time. So you may not be able to know today, listening to this video in April of 2025, you may not be able to know today exactly what your action point will be, but you're probably going to be able to know in a couple of years if you continue to exist inside the same market. So giving yourself the time is critical in this area if you don't already understand it. Many of you have a natural desire to understand this because you're trying to figure out how to package effectively. And so a lot of us are already going to have a pretty decent set of skills in understanding how to contextualize ourselves in our neighborhood. Like how to name it? What is the actual context that I'm living in? I'm in, let's say, culinary cozy mystery is my little corner of cozy mystery. I am also in the larger neighborhood, right? Like maybe the city of Woodbury, right? Like I'm in a larger neighborhood of cozy mystery, but really the neighborhood that I'm in is a very specific neighborhood when I'm consistently writing in that genre. When I'm in getting used to other genres, it takes me some time to figure out what my context is unless I have selected it on purpose. So the people who move to a city and who pick, like, I want to live in Haight-Ashbury, for instance, it's like, okay, that's a definable neighborhood. I understand where the boundaries are. I am choosing to live there because I want to live in that neighborhood and it's very intentional. Versus those of us who buy a house somewhere. Like I just bought a house somewhere. I didn't know what neighborhood I was moving into. I just decided it was where I wanted to live. I loved it. As soon as I saw the pictures, I knew it was where I wanted to live, and I've never regretted the choice. So for me, I made the decision based on factors that were neighborhood specific that I didn't understand at the time. And I happen to like the neighborhood that I live in, but I didn't choose to live here. And I think this is the important part of contextualizing. Not everything we do has to be intentional. Some of it, it's okay if it's not intentional because you can move slightly. Like I've thought about this metaphor pretty deeply at this point, and I feel like this is a little bit like I know that I want to live in this neighborhood, but not this house. So this series might not be it for me, but I know I want to stay in culinary cozy. This particular character might not be it for me, but I like this world a lot. So I want to stay maybe on this street, but just this character is not the right one for me or whatever, right? Like there's all of this nuance that comes to belonging in a particular corner in the industry. And the more you intend to stay there, the more important it is to be able to contextualize yourself in that space, to be able to network with other people, to understand what the cover shifts and trends look like if you want to be aware of that, because not everybody does. So the ability to contextualize is really important. That's skill number one, just knowing where you're located. Which seems like such a strange thing to say, but it is a skill. It's a skill of awareness. Okay, that's number one. Skill number two is called vigilance. What's going on around me? What are my neighbors doing? Who walks their kids to school every day? Who's consistently parked in this one place? Like that kind of vigilance about your neighborhood. And it's really important as a skill to know that not everyone has the same level of need for vigilance. Not everyone has the capacity to be as aware of what's going on in their neighborhood as other people do. So some of us are going to be real extreme on this side. We want to know everything. But when we want to know everything, part of vigilance is knowing that not every single piece of data requires action. So that's a skill that many of us have not yet figured out how to practice. We keep being told we're supposed to be vigilant about the market and about the changes, but we don't really understand what the skill of vigilance looks like. Because for us, vigilance looks like taking action on every single piece of data that exists. But when you have people who practice really, really effective vigilance, what you see is their awareness often has no impact on their decisions whatsoever. So if I'm only ever going to make a cover decision one time, and then I've just decided those are the covers I'm going to go with, I'm not going to watch the trends, I may not be paying as close attention to what the cover trends are in my genre. I have no idea what's going on in cozy mystery right now because I haven't recovered a series in 5 years. So I'm not going to pay a lot of attention right now because I'm not starting anything new. But once I start something new, or if I feel like, you know what, I want to experiment with doing new covers, then I might start paying a little bit more attention to what's going on in the covers in Cozy. But for me, it's important as a skill building exercise in the vigilance skill in particular to either decide if I can't not take action when I see changes, then I need to decrease the amount of vigilance that I'm willing. I need to close the blinds sometimes, right? If I'm not going to spend thousands of dollars recovering my books, do I really need to pay attention to what's happening in the covers of the genre right now? No, I need to focus on writing my books. That's what I need. But that capacity for vigilance and that high level of skill that's required in knowing what to pay attention to and what not to, like what are my neighbors doing? Do I necessarily need to move just because I have a neighbor who parks in this weird place every time? No, part of being vigilant is understanding how to handle the data that you're getting. And too many of us feel like vigilance is required of us because we're so scared of not selling and we're scared of not being able to respond to the market. And we are not doing a good job of calming our vigilance. And so, what I need to ask us to do is to stop watching for a while. Think about that there may be particular times in your career where you're going to have higher levels of vigilance. Like if I haven't sold in this series for 4 or 5 years, I might change the covers or 2 or 3 years, but I'm not going to be actively looking constantly trying to figure out if I should change my covers or not because the cover trends just do not change that quickly. They do change sometimes, but they don't change every day, every week, every month. Sometimes they don't even change every year. So it is important to know that vigilance is not required on all levels at all times. And some of us, that's the primary skill we need to work on is understanding how to monitor our vigilance. If we are too stressed out by watching data, then we need to pull back on it. If we are too stressed out about changes in the market, we need to do some self-regulation, reminding ourselves that trends are not worth following for most of us. Like, you don't necessarily want to be in line with the cover trends at all times because those changes and fluctuations are so often in response to other people's hypervigilance and not in response to what the readers are actually doing. So just as an example, the illustrated covers in Spicy Romance. When we first started hearing about that trend change, it was so far before most people changed their covers that the level of vigilance everyone had at all times trying to figure out, should I do this? Should I not do this? Should I do this? Should I not do this? It was too much vigilance. And some people were too stressed out by it. It was not beneficial for them. They really needed to just not be looking, not be asking the questions. And this is something you learn over time, but also the level of vigilance that is required. This is what Nat was saying in the video, the chasing the needle thing. When we're constantly making changes, constantly making decisions out of fear, we are not giving ourselves the capacity to see what's really working and what really isn't working. We are not doing the learning curve effectively or the first phase of business, the research and development phase effectively, because we want to make sure that we are and this is a later skill, but we want to make sure that we're giving appropriate time to the experiments that we're running and that we are going all the way through the strategy that we choose so that we know the data we're getting is actually the data that is real, that we know that we can trust it. And sometimes we just make changes too fast. We change things constantly. We're always trying to update packaging. We're always trying to figure these things out. And some of you love doing that. Some of you, that's a game for you. It's fun. But if it's stressing you out, you need to be cautious about how much airtime you're giving that stuff in your head. Because so often we want to play a longer game in market awareness than we think we should. But the reason we think that we shouldn't isn't because we shouldn't. It's because we're afraid of missing out. And we need to understand that the time for being afraid of missing out is over. We're not in the gold rush anymore. Trends come so much slower now. We think it happens faster because we're more aware of it. But as Nat said in the last video, we just don't understand how long it actually takes for trends to change. Those of you who are super in the drafter phase, you're very high competition, you're maybe high strategic in the Clifton strengths. You might be 3 Enneagrams. Like you're going to have a different set of rules for yourself when it comes to that. But most of us need to be a lot less change oriented. We need to be a lot more, let's pick the path and stick to it so we know what the results are. And yes, that's a risk, but chasing the needle is also a risk. We don't think it is because we're doing it out of fear response. But again, self-regulation is important. Obviously, that's going to be one of the skills, but I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about it, but that is a foundational important skill. We have got to be able to center ourselves when we feel fear coming up because that's going to steal the capacity that we have to practice the next skill. And so often what it looks like to practice vigilance effectively is, and you heard Nat talking about this, or I think I was the person who talked about it, where he still looks at the data every week. He still looks at the data every month, but he's not necessarily taking action on it anymore because now he understands he doesn't have to be as vigilant. So either when he's making decisions about something, like if he has a really specific packaging question, obviously he's going to be more analytical. He's going to go and look more at very specific things, compare covers to each other, maybe compare blurbs to each other, things like that. But he's not going to be doing that level of work all the time because most of the time we need to practice skill number 3, which we'll talk about in a second. But many of us need to understand how, and this comes from practice, that when we are getting when we're feeling like we have to make an urgent decision because we've seen something change, the first thing we need to do is regulate, not make a choice. We need to get back above the line, be in a fit state, be conscious again, and then make decisions in a fit state. And so often we're getting so afraid because that fear response is putting us into not a fit state. What happens if this doesn't? What if, like that kind of spiraling, right? When you catch yourself in that space, it's time to regulate. So, okay, let's move on to skill number 3. Skill number 3 is focus, the ability to narrow down what you pay attention to and what you don't. And this goes hand in hand with vigilance, because if you have an overcorrected hypervigilance, then you're going to have a hard time practicing focus. So these two skills are really relevant to each other. But once you start to develop a little more focus, it should also help you have more practice in being appropriately vigilant about things. So some of us, all we needed to help us in the vigilance skill chain was just to hear somebody say, not that much changes, don't chase the needle, stay the course, right? And that's the kind of focus goal here is when I'm good at focusing, I have the capacity to hone in on what's important and to let everything else sort of fall by the wayside. And this isn't just the strength of focus, because of course, one of the Clifton strengths is called focus, that goal-oriented strength. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the ability to parse through what you should and shouldn't be doing. For some of you, higher strategic, higher focus, higher discipline people, again, Clifton strengths language, you will naturally be better at focusing than some of us who don't have those. But if we don't have the strengths, we can still practice some of the behavior. And specifically, we can practice missing out. This is something many of us don't want to do. We are very committed to not missing out. We're constantly casting around, we're constantly inputting, we're always looking for the new, the new, the new, the new, because we want to know, is this going to work? Is this going to work? Especially those of us who are high and strategic, right? Is this going to work? The problem is we won't know until we know. So us fretting about it when we don't know is not actually being helpful. And so much of the capacity to practice focusing as a market awareness skill is the ability to say, that's not important, that's not important, that's not important. Instead, I'm going to do this. That's not important. Instead, this is important. That's what focus is. It's parsing through. If you cannot get here on your own, this is a place that I would suggest getting some coaching around. So, most of the time, if you see somebody who is a Clifton Strengths coach, especially if they've coached with us before, and they can look at your strengths and see, okay, you don't have high focus. So, how do we help you focus when you don't have high focus? You don't necessarily want to ask a high focus coach about this unless they're very good at putting themselves in your shoes, because the way high focus coaches prioritize is really different. But this is where coaching can be really helpful. And I'm going to provide a little bit here for you to try to break the gap or to try to fill the gap in the skill chain for you here. Write the book. Write the book. If you're finding yourself doing too much researching, trying to figure out what happened, why isn't this selling, what corner of the market am I in, how's this, stop, open the manuscript, write the book. Nope, do not argue with me. Stop, open the manuscript, write the book. Or stop, get regulated, then write the book, and then work on the marketing later. Because unless you're not in active drafting mode or active editing mode, there is nothing more important that you could ever be doing than working on the book. I don't care if you're going to argue with me that you should be on TikTok. I don't care if you're going to argue. You make your own choices. But I'm telling you objectively, as a success coach, there's never anything more important you can be doing than writing the book. And I say this not just from having coached thousands of people, I also say it from understanding what really sells books. What really sells books is not marketing. I know some of you are going to argue with me about that. Obviously, marketing can sell books. Obviously, discovery can sell books. I'm not saying it doesn't. What I'm saying is, the book is the thing. And we used to joke about this back in the day. Any of you who are around before indie publishing, when you would go to these big conferences and listen to the agent and editor panels, and they would constantly get asked, what do you want? What do you want? What are you looking for? And they would say, write me a good book. And everybody was so frustrated about that because they just wanted someone to tell them, to shortcut it, give them the silver bullet. But they just gave you the freaking silver bullet, you guys. They just gave it to you. Write a great book. And what I don't mean is if your book isn't selling, it isn't great. What I am saying is you're giving yourself a much better shot that the marketing will do a great job for you when you do it, that the packaging will make a good impact for you when you do it. If you write a book people want to read, that is always the number one priority. So go write the book. If you are feeling anxious about the marketing, no decision you are going to make right now is going to solve it. Regulate yourself, go write the book. In fact, some of you need to pause this right now because you are madly listening to this, trying to find the silver bullet to make this book sell that's not selling. And I need to tell you, if you've spent more than 3 months worrying about it, you need to stop worrying about it for a minute and go write the book. You can return to it later. Okay, go do it now. I'm not going to wait, but you can pause it and then I will wait. Okay. But this is really paramount. And this comes from experience. The longer you get into this, the more you see, the longer people do this, the more you see them focusing more and more on writing a better and better product, especially as the competition goes up, as the market gets more saturated. We are not able to keep up with the flood. We can't keep up with the algorithm. So that becomes not the game we play anymore. We play the game of writing a book people want to read. And obviously, the other parts of being good at focusing are doing things like understanding how to prioritize. This is why I suggested if you can't do this naturally for yourself, talk to someone who can help you. But focus is sort of the monitor for vigilance. These two skills are hand in hand with each other. Okay, next, skill number 4, practice. Practice is the fourth skill. So Nat made a comment in the interview where he said this is a non-random process. And he said this several times. And I want to deep dive a little bit into what that means because this is where practice becomes really important. You can learn more from regular releasing. You can learn more from watching your own results and seeing what happens and being able to analyze how you have done in community with other people if you need it, with coaches if you need it, with mentors and peers if you need it. But you can do better just committing to the process, committing to the long game and practicing. Random would mean none of this makes a difference. Me getting better at something doesn't make a difference. Me increasing my skills doesn't make a difference. That's what random would mean. Non-random means it is on some level a progressive set of skills that you are continuing to develop over the course of your lifetime. So you have to allow yourself to practice because you need to continue getting better over time. Non-random means that if you get better at selecting covers because you had to select bad covers previously, then that was a meaningful mistake that you made, and it means it's going to help you be better in the future. That's essentially what non-random means. Those of us who do not easily come by this, we are not dominant in learner, we're not dominant in deliberative or developer, individualization, strategic. We are not dominant in things that make it easy for us to understand the fact that progressive stuff is still worth doing. Then we need to understand that from people who have that type of strength, who have that type of genius, that they can say, look at the longer game here. Understand that if you continue to get better at this, if you continue to add skills to your arsenal, if you continue to work on things, it's sort of like when you've taken a job where you know they want you to be in this job forever. Forever is wrong, but for a long time. Then you know that it's safer for you to make mistakes because you're not going to be fired at any time. It's not going to be just over at any time. You know that the people who are there want you to go through the learning curve. They recognize there's a learning curve to go through, and they want you to go through it so that you can progress and become better. And then they're going to resource you however they can to get you to that place. And I've worked in jobs like this before. The difference between this job and a job where you're afraid you're going to get fired at any time is primarily the safety of your learning curve, the safety of practice. So when you know you are in a game where it's possible for you to fail and still succeed. So fail now, succeed down the line, fail better now so that you can succeed later, right? When you know that it's safe to do that, when you understand the game you're playing, then practice becomes a skill that comes easier for you. This comes harder for some of us because we are playing a game that we instinctively think could be over at any minute. We think we only have one shot at this. We think that if we don't do it right now, we're never going to do it. We have all of this very limited thinking around this, and we need to shift the perspective that we have slightly from one where if this is over, like I always use the chess metaphor to talk about this, right? If you are focusing too much on the queen, because the queen can sort of move anywhere, but the queen can be killed easily also, right? So the queen can move anywhere, but then that makes her a target because she's so important. And if we focus too much in the game of chess on the queen, then we do things that will inadvertently leave the king unprotected. So we want to be as cautious as possible about the king because the king is what ends the game. Even though the king is very limited in movements, is very vulnerable, the queen is not the most important piece on the board. The king is the most important piece because the game is not over until the king falls. And some of us have this mentality that me succeeding in publishing in this particular iteration is the king. That if I don't succeed right now in this exact moment, that the game is going to be over. And I can almost feel the anxiety in some of you when you think this. If I don't succeed right now, the game is over. But that's not the king, my sweet summer child. That is not the king. The king is your will to continue in this game. The king is your desire to stay in the game. That's the only thing that can ever end the game. You can fail 1,000 times and succeed on 1,001. You can fail for 15 years and still take off. You can have a 25-year research and development phase and still take off. You can take you 10 years to write your first book and you can still take off. All of those things can still happen. You can have failure after failure after failure and still take off. It does not matter. The queen is not the success of individual books, individual series. The queen isn't even the ability to maintain high levels of income. You can get a part-time job if you have to. You can go in and out of full-time publishing. You can do all of these things that will protect your ability to stay in the game as long as you know what the king really is. If you don't know what the king really is, you're always going to be in danger of making decisions that lack focus in response to high levels of vigilance because you are always worried that if you fail, the king falls. Individual success is just the queen. You still have the king in play. You can still win this. And that's really important to me. That's why we talk so much about gamification around here. It's why we talk so much about the rules of the game. We are too focused on success and not focused enough on practice. Because as Nat said, this is a non-random process. We can get better at it. It is progressive. The data is meaningful, right? So it's really important to me that we have that discussion, that if you are not allowing yourself to take chances, if you are not allowing yourself to move forward, you are playing the wrong game. The wrong thing is your king. You can knock the queen over and it does not matter as long as the king stands. And the king standing is just your desire to remain in this, your will to continue figuring it out no matter what, your will. And this will take vulnerability because some of us have to face parts of ourselves when it comes to the queen falling that are going to be horrible to face. They're going to be painful to face. I'm not saying this is going to be easy. And that's the other thing, is that some of us have it needs to be easy as the queen, but actually it needs to be easy as our king. Because if it's not easy, we lose our will. And if that is where you are, you need to know that about yourself because that's going to determine how aggressively you go after this. If you don't move, it needs to be easy as an expectation onto one of the other pieces and make the king be, I can do hard things. You are not going to survive, my friend, because this is not an easy industry to survive in. So we need to build our resilience, which again is another skill. I'll talk about that in a minute. These are all progressive. But I needed to talk about practice because so many of us have to shift our mindset when it comes to failure and practice. And we need to understand that fundamental difference between believing that success is the king and not. Clearly, I need to do a whole episode about that, and we will. But for now, let's move on to the next skill. Okay, skill number 5. So essentially, skill number 4 was experimentation. And then this 5th skill, which builds on that, is evaluation. So once I have done all of this experimentation, how do I evaluate the results of what I'm getting? How do I understand and change and narrow into what I want to change next time, that kind of stuff? How do I evaluate the results that I have gotten? And this is an area where most of us struggle to do this on our own. Some of us are okay. The more confident we are in our ability to analyze data, and the more confident we are in our skill chain, really, of that data analysis, the more likely we are to have an easier time with the evaluation skill. Additionally, those of us who are exceptionally intuitive and who are exceptionally fast decision makers, and we just trust ourselves and trust our gut, and there's no questioning. We can often also have a lot of analysis capacity that we just don't know we have, because those two skills are basically the same thing and we just don't know it. It's just that some of us are doing it more consciously than others are. But that analysis skill is just essentially really slowed down intuition. And I don't mean slowed down like worse, I just mean more conscious intuition. But evaluation in particular is the ability to tell whether or not my experiment worked, and then the ability to tell what it was that didn't work. And this is why I say many of us cannot do this for ourselves, because we get too caught in the immediate details and we go below the line really quickly about how the experiment turned out. So this is often a place where you need to meet with someone. You may need a marketing expert to help you understand this. On our Patreon, we consistently do these marketing Q&As with Crystal. You can also book a micro coaching session, which is a small group session with her. You can also book individual coaching with her if you want. Many of the other coaches are okay talking about results and experiments and things like that as well. You can always ask them if they're interested in that in their micro coachings. And then, of course, there are a whole bunch of other coaches out there who do things like this. But because it's often difficult to see the results of an experiment when we have to commit to these really long-term timelines, we also need to increase our skills in the next one, which is patience. Spoiler alert. So essentially, this boils down to when I decide that I want to change something, can I effectively narrow down to only changing one thing? So, do I change just the blurbs and then test if that worked? And if that made any difference in the way my ads performed? Do I change just the background color of the cover? Do I change just the cover itself? Do I change just the title? Do I change whatever it is, right? Whatever I'm deciding that I'm going to do, can I run an effective enough experiment that I make evaluation easy on myself? And then am I willing to accept the answer when I get the data? And I do think this is important. So in the previous interview, Nat gave us a couple of options for how to run some tests, things like how to run blurb tests and stuff like that. If you haven't used the Kindletrends service before, one of my favorite parts of the weekly newsletters is that he gives you a PDF. If you get your genre or your subgenre, he gives you a PDF of the blurbs that you can go through and do some analysis on and see what different blurbs have in common, how they are stylized, what person they're in, how, so it narrows the data set down for you, which again is, I think, one of the most helpful things about it. I want to not have to go collect that stuff for myself. So I really appreciate that part of the service. But that's one of the things that if I'm doing blurb tests, I may decide part of my process is going to be some vigilance about blurbs that are out there, and then some focus down to just the blurbs that I want to compare, and then some practice, right? So, like, all of these skills are sort of progressive in the way that we execute them. And also, because they are so complicated, and because some of them require really intact skill chains in other areas, like I've mentioned about the evaluation skill, not everybody has an easy time objectively analyzing data. But if objectivity is the primary problem, I can do that by bringing somebody else in. If being able to make the data patterns make sense and being able to compare them to each other and parse through what it is that's going on is my problem, then I can bring somebody in to help me with that. What I often can't do, and this is the really hard part about some of the market awareness stuff, is that a lot of these skills require some level of community or support or collaboration. A lot of it is not going to be me doing it on my own unless you are one of those people. And those people do exist, by the way. But unless you are one of those people who can do all of these skills without needing anybody's help, or you can grow all of your capacity in these skills now that you know what to do without needing help. So evaluation is really important. Did the experiment work or not? am I increasing my capacity to tell whether the experiment worked? Because the more I'm relying on things like I have to understand Amazon's algorithms, I have to understand release day rhythms, I have to understand what other people are doing in the industry, the more we are going back to things like vigilance again and contextualization. And then if we're trying to go to too much higher of a level and we're getting outside of our neighborhood, right? So I'm assuming that when I'm looking at the evaluation that I'm primarily looking at limited data sets. But if I'm now trying to compare myself to the whole industry, all of a sudden I have to go back and recontextualize, and now I'm in such a bigger place, and now I may not be able to focus. And so there are all these things where if I'm taking too many variables into account when I'm looking at the evaluation phase, then I'm also probably making some fundamental attribution errors. And it's painful to watch people do this because we do it with so much certainty. We do it with things like large societal trends all the time, where we will notice a correlation between two events happening and then say, this is why this is happening. And you'll listen to somebody who's really familiar with systems thinking. Like there are a couple of friends I have who are really great at systems thinking. And every time we hear some of this attribution, we're just like, oh, yeah, they don't understand X or they don't understand Y. They're trying to make this too linear or too easily understandable because they need to latch on to something to blame about why this is happening. But that's not actually what's going on systemically. And so it's really fascinating to watch this happen. But if you are a person who feels like you can't figure out why this is happening, you can't understand, I'm just going to shortcut some of this for you. This is why I have the phrase Loki is in charge. Because sometimes when we're spiraling in this evaluation process, all of us do this, by the way. We have the capacity to say, I can't figure this out right now. So I got to move on to something else, right? We're going back to the focus skill. These results aren't making sense to me. I don't think they're going to make sense to anyone. I've tried to talk about them with other people. We can't figure this out. So I have to close the loop on my own in my head, or I have to say more data will become apparent later, because that's also often what happens. And understanding how to evaluate things in a long-term sense is that sometimes you can't evaluate things too close to the event itself. You have to be willing to give yourself a lot of timeline in order to be able to look backwards and see what was actually going on during that. And I did this a lot with people who were releasing in September and October of 2024, is that I would say, you don't understand. Everybody is struggling with their Facebook ad returns right now. This is not just a you thing. It is a look at how much money is being funneled into the Facebook market about the election right now in the United States. So this is not just a you thing. You can't take responsibility for the failure in this area. But they were so committed to that, right? Like so committed to no, it has to be me because it has to be something that's under my control. And I'm like, accept that when they're not under your control, it's important to acknowledge, you know what, Loki's in charge. This is something I cannot figure out. I can't easily see the pattern here. So either there isn't a pattern that I can see or that anyone can see, like the causes are too hidden from me, they're not something that's visible, or it is for the future me to decide. And I just don't think we are conscious enough in the evaluation process that if the evidence isn't immediately visible, sometimes the answer is the next skill, which is freaking patience. So skill number 6 is patience. And this is the one no one wants to hear about because we all want it now. We're used to instant gratification. We want things to happen faster. A lot of us are already frustrated with how long it takes to do some of these things in the industry anyway. And me telling you it's going to take time, Kevin, is not your favorite thing to hear. You don't want me to tell you that. So I have to acknowledge the pain point of you would rather not hear the thing that is true and then say, but I need you to hear this. I need you to remind yourself sometimes that this is a long game. Patience is required. Me wanting to know this right now is actually just a sign that I'm dysregulated and I need to get regulated again. I need to get into a fit state to make decisions and or I need to write and or I need to walk away and rest because sometimes the answer is actually I need you to have more patience than what you're having, which means you have to practice patience. You can't just be frustrated that you don't have it because being frustrated that we don't have it causes stress in us. And instead, what I need you to do is start actively practicing patience. And what that looks like is the next skill we'll talk about is self-regulation. It is doing things to your physical state currently, causing rest, causing peace, causing relaxation in your current physical state so that you will be able to handle the fact that it is going to take some time. So, wanting things to take a shorter amount of time is fine as long as the blip resolves itself quickly. When the blip doesn't resolve itself quickly and we go looking for ways to speed the process up and we're spiraling in our impatience, that's when I need us to practice patience and you practice stability, security, and peace in that setting. If you're above the line, do a positive emotion cycle. If you're above the line, practice some gratitude. If you're below the line, you may need to complain, be frustrated, be angry, etc., so that you can get to whatever the action point is in this. Because some of us are impatient for reasons that are very present. Like we're impatient because we want to make money so we can leave this job. We're impatient because we want to buy a new house, et cetera, et cetera, like those kinds of things. And I may not be able to say, nope, just buy the house today, just quit your job and get a new job today. But what we can do is practice making the life we are living more tenable and sustainable and less stressful. So if there's something I can do today to make my stressful job be easier to tolerate, rather than trying to put pressure on myself to do something I can't do, which is to make the publishing world work any faster than it does, to make my writing happen any faster, make my publishing happen any faster than it does. Instead, I want to stop, pause, focus on bringing something in that life into today, practicing something that I want to exist when I have that future life today. It doesn't have to be, I have a different job. What you may decide to do instead is take a couple of days off from that job and get a break from it. What you may decide to do is stand up to that boss that you have and tell them you're not going to be their, workhorse anymore. What you may do is say, you know what, I have this relationship that's not working right now. We're going to have a little bit of honesty instead of me waiting to create honesty for when my books take off or waiting to feel peace when my books take off because I don't think you understand how hard it's going to be to practice that security and gratitude and peacefulness and stability in the future if you're not doing anything to practice it internally today. So, part of patience is understanding how to create even moments, even one moment of disruption of that stress pattern, disruption of that frustration pattern, disruption, just one moment of stability, security, and safety. That's all I need you to do. This is why I suggest for some of you to do parachute recordings for yourself, because you need to remember when I say Loki's in charge, it's not to take your agency away from you. It's to free you up from feeling like you have to solve things in the past that you can't solve. It's to free you up from trying to expect the past to be different than it is. It's to free you up from the stress that you're feeling about the analysis. It's not to say anything about the future. It's not to say anything about the predictability of your luck in the future. It's to say, let's not focus on this thing that's not changeable. Let's not practice resulting. That's what it is to say. And on that note, practicing patience requires us to be good at this foundational skill of making ourselves be in a fit state. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this one because I feel like I spend a lot of time talking about this. But if you are not already adept at knowing how to get yourself above the line. There are some easy regulation techniques. You can literally Google them and start working your way through them. And I want you to do them proactively because so many of you have said things to me like, I don't know when I'm dysregulated. And I'm like, well, I can see when you're dysregulated and you're dysregulated a lot. So let's practice some of these techniques in preparation to keep your body as regulated as we can through the day. This is why I say we need to practice some of these things that we want to happen in the future. We need to practice little moments of them today because the parachute of that parachute recording, when I try to disrupt our thinking patterns so that we don't go into those spirals, the parachute part is not to poof the thought. It's not to say, I'm never going to have these thoughts again. This is going to go away. It's to say, how about instead of spiraling all the way to the bottom in a free fall, that we instead just relax. And I don't mean relax like just relax. That's not what I mean. I mean, we make our body relax. Telling my brain to relax is going to dysregulate my body, but helping my body do something that will relax it is actually going to relax my brain as well. And we just don't know that. Because when you tell me to relax and you say that word like calm down, relax, etc., nobody's going to calm down because someone tells them to calm down. But if I'm in a regulated state and I stand with you and I remind you that you have agency, and I remind you that you are loved and valued, and I remind you that you are worthwhile, and I remind you that you are important and that you matter, and I remind you that you have agency and control and all these things, then it's easier for you to regulate your physical body so that you can get into a state where it's easy to make decisions. And that's the only goal here. That is so important. It is the foundational skill of market awareness, is the capacity to remain connected to your security that you have the skills or access to the skills or will have the skills in the future that will help you do this. This is again that whole difference between can't and can't yet thing for me. When I say I can't and I focus on that feeling of I can't, I can't, I can't, I can't, then I am not opening myself up to the possibility that I can change my state. So I can't practice this particular skill. I can't do this thing. I can't be honest. I can't be vulnerable. I can't take risks. I can't analyze. I can't read cover signals. I can't, right? You can't do that right now. That's okay. But there are ways if you want to, if it's a skill that you do actually want to practice, that you want to get better at. Again, is the king standing? Is my will to engage in this still standing? Then you can move forward. You can make progress. Again, like Nat said, this is a non-random process. Each one of these skills, they're a non-random process. It's possible for you to acquire all kinds of different little skills in these areas. And anything you do that is even a small increase in development from what you did yesterday matters because this process is negotiable in the future. The difference between can't and can't yet is huge. And I'm going to do more content on that in the future. But what I really wanted to do today was just to outline these 7 skills as much as I could because when I say, hey, let's practice market awareness, or we talk about existing in a neighborhood, especially those of you who are not going to do right to market stuff, like you're not going to intentionally craft your books to fit the market, then we have to understand, how do I exist inside of this market? How do I practice awareness without it eating me alive? How do I practice it with intention or with capacity or with intuition or whatever it is that we're going to practice it with? But how do I do that? And there are certain things that we can increase capacity in. And if you are going to do only one of these, my preference obviously would be regulation, because I just don't think most of us realize how dysregulated we are an awful lot. But I'm not going to say that because I know people are frustrated with hearing me say it all the time. But my second highest preference for people is the practice skill. So regulation is what I would prefer. But if you don't want to do that one, focus on the practice. Focus on encouraging yourself to take risks with allowing yourself to do something that will make forward progress, that will be a little bit, I don't know what's going to happen if I do this, just a little bit, right? So just take a little bit of action in that direction. Obviously, you can practice any one of the skills that you want, but practice and patience are the two that I think are the most necessary for the highest overlap of people. So if you have questions, please ask them in the comments. We are going to do a project, a Kickstarter project on the 7 skills of writing to market at some point. And so I hope that you will take a look at that if you have any interest. My hope is to be able to do some more content on skill building, in particular on both the Quitcast and on the Patreon and in other places, to try to help us understand what that this is a non-random process or this is a developable process means. So I'm hoping to be able to help in that. It's relatively easy for me to see skill chains and to understand where skill gaps are. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to provide some help. And if you are looking for places to learn some of the skills and you don't know how to do that, please do ask me. Take me up on that offer. We will have more information on the Patreon if you want, but also you can just ask me in the comments on the YouTube. So, all right, I'm going to stop now because this has been a long one. Thank you all so much for being here and for paying attention to this video. I hope this has been helpful for you. I will see you on the next Quitcast. All right, bye everybody.